$411,000 left my accounts in 14 months, and there is not one forged signature anywhere in it. Every dollar of it was counted out across a counter in the daylight by a woman who has worked that window for 34 years to somebody who had every legal right in the world to be standing there. So what do you do when nobody broke a law and you are still ruined? I have had a long while to sit with that question, and what I came out with is worth saying out loud, because I think there are a lot of you sitting out there tonight with your name on a piece of paper you have never once read all the way through. My name is Hoyt Sharp, 78 years old this past January. I ran a cotton gin in Teal County, Georgia for 44 years. A farmer-owned gin about 9 miles outside a town called Culverson, and before that my daddy ran it. And before that he swept the floor of it when he was 11 years old, and they still ran the presses off a steam engine. Before I go on, do something small for me. Wherever you are sitting right now, stop and listen for 1 second, and tell me down in the comments the one sound you can hear. A refrigerator, a dog, rain on a roof, somebody in the next room. I have gotten to where I like knowing what the rest of the world sounds like while one old man talks. And if it is late where you are, say that too, because I keep company with people in a lot of different hours. No, a cotton gin is not a factory, whatever it looks like from the road. A gin is a machine for taking a thing apart without breaking it. Seed cotton comes in off a farmer's field in a module the size of a school bus, and inside that module there is lint and seed and stems and leaf and dirt and sometimes a snake, and the whole job is to pull the lint out of all of that and lay it into a bale without tearing the fiber. And the one thing, the only thing, that decides whether you can do that job is moisture. Cotton that comes in too wet will not clean. It packs, it ropes, it wraps the saws, and it chokes a gin stand dead. But cotton that comes in too dry is worse. And every ginner in the South knows it, and most farmers do not. Because dry cotton looks beautiful. It flows. It runs through the machine like water, and it makes a pretty bale, and the man on the module truck feels good about himself. And it comes out the other end broken. Fiber is measured by how long it is. That length is most of what the bale is worth. And a dry fiber does not bend when a sawtooth catches it. It snaps. You can run a whole day of it and never hear one thing wrong, and then 6 weeks later a card comes back from a room in Macon with a staple length on it that costs a farmer more money than he made all year, and he will stand in my office and swear on his mother that it was good cotton when it left the field. It was. My daddy had one line about it, and he must have said it 4,000 times. You cannot gin dry cotton. You can only break it. So the first thing that ever happens at a gin, before a single pound moves, is that somebody walks out to that module with a moisture probe. Mine was my daddy's. It is a steel rod, a little over 5 foot long, with a wooden handle worn down to nothing on the left side where his thumb rode, and a brass collar where the cable comes out, and it reads the percent of moisture wherever the tip of it is sitting, and nowhere else in the world. And here is the rule. Carry it out of here with you if you carry nothing else. Because this entire story is that one rule. 5 places, and you write down the worst one. Not the average. Never the average. You probe the north end and the south end and both sides, and you climb up and you probe the crown, and then you look at those 5 numbers and you find the ugliest one, and that is the number you write on the ticket. Because the machine does not run on your 5 numbers. The machine only ever meets one place at a time, and it will find the worst place all by itself, and it will find it at 4 in the morning when you are the only man on the floor. My daddy learned that in 1966, which was the year he took an average. He had 4 modules that came in from up on the Ochlockney bottom, and 3 of them read fine, and 1 of them read like a creek bed, and he added them up and divided by 4, and he wrote down the pretty number, and he started the gin. It took 11 hours to get the fire out. Nobody was killed. A man named Emmett Rowe lost most of a hand, and my daddy went to see him every Sunday for 9 years, until Emmett died. And my daddy never once in his life told me that story without stopping in the middle of it. I married Mavis Odom in 1969. She kept the books at the gin for 22 years, and then she went to work at the Farmers Exchange Bank in Culverson and sat at the new accounts desk there for the last 9 years before she retired. And she was better at both jobs than I ever was at mine. She had her own version of my daddy's rule. She would hear me arguing with a farmer about a moisture ticket, and she would wait until he drove off, and she would say it without even looking up from the adding machine. An average is just a polite way of lying to yourself. She died 4 years ago in March. Pancreatic. It ran 11 weeks from the morning they first said the word to the afternoon. We put her in the ground at Shiloh, and there is no sense dressing that up, because a man my age gets nowhere doing it. I did not handle it. I did not handle it at all. I stopped going to church for about a year. I ate standing up over the sink. I would go out to the shed at 2 in the morning and sharpen things that did not need sharpening. And the whole time I was doing all of that, my daughter Carolyn was the one soul in this world who kept on showing up. And you need to know that going in, because if I let you think she was a monster from the first day, then I have lied to you, and I have also let myself off a good deal too easy. She was 52 years old then. She came every other day. She washed things. She sat with me on the back steps in the dark and did not talk, which is a harder gift to give than most people know. When my hands started going, she was the one who noticed. That happened about 8 months after the funeral. My right hand started to shake, not a tremble, a shake, and it got so I could not sign my own name twice the same way. It is called essential tremor. It is not Parkinson's, it is not a stroke, it is not the beginning of anything at all, and Dr. Womack over in Nashville, Georgia told me plain that it has nothing whatsoever to do with what goes on between a man's ears. But I will tell you what a shaking hand does to a man in a small town. It makes people talk to him slower. That is the whole of it. Nobody says a cruel word. They just start talking to you the way you talk to a child in a waiting room, and they start finishing your sentences, and after a while you notice that when you and somebody else walk up to a counter together, the person behind the counter looks at the other one. Carolyn was the one who said it first, on the back steps, in a voice so kind, I can still hear the shape of it. Daddy, let me get on the account so I can pay your bills. And I want to say something here that I have said to about 4 different people since, and every one of them looked at me like I was making excuses for her. I was not being tricked in that moment. That was a good idea. I could not write a check. I had statements piling up on the counter that I was not opening, because opening them meant signing something at the end. A man in my position needs somebody who can sign, and the person who ought to be able to sign is the child who is standing in your kitchen at 7 in the morning. So we drove into Culverson on a Tuesday and we went into the Farmers Exchange Bank and we sat down at the desk that used to be my wife's desk. The woman who helped us was Pearline Dewberry, who everybody has called Pearl since about the year the interstate came through. She had been at that bank 34 years. She and Mavis worked side by side for 9 of them, and at Mavis's funeral she stood at the back and did not come up to me, which at the time I thought was cold, and which I understand now was the exact opposite. Pearl got the folder out, and then she asked me a question. She said, Mr. Sharp, before I fill anything out, do you want Carolyn to be able to sign on this account, or do you want her to own it? I did not think about it for 1 second. I said, sign it. She just needs to be able to sign it. Pearl said, all right. And she took one form out of that folder and put a different form back in it. And she turned the page around to face me and read the whole thing to me out loud. Every line of it, in that flat courthouse voice people use when they are reading something to you and not at you. And I signed my shaky name at the bottom, and Carolyn signed under it, and Pearl put her initials in a little box on the right-hand side, and we went and got a hamburger. Now, hold that Tuesday. Everything in my life turns on that Tuesday, and I did not know it for 2.5 years. For about 9 months, it was exactly what it looked like. The power bill got paid. The property tax got paid. My drug plan got straightened out, which I had not been able to do myself since Mavis died. Carolyn brought me a little folder every month with everything in it, and I never once opened the folder. And I want you to write that down as the first thing I did wrong. Then Randy's trucks started going bad. Randy Tillery is my son-in-law. He has hauled peanuts and cotton and lime out of that county since he was 23 years old. And for a long stretch he did all right. But he went from 2 trucks to 5 in 1 year. And he did it the way everybody down here does it, which is on paper. And then a motor let go. And then a driver quit in Alabama. And then the fuel card people changed the terms on him. All of that came to me later. At the time, the only thing I knew was that Carolyn got thin. She started coming by less and staying shorter. She got a look around her mouth. And when I asked about money, once, standing right there in the carport, she told me the certificate had rolled into a different account at a better rate and I did not need to worry about it. And there it is. That minute in the carport is the one I would go back after. If a man ever got to go back after one. I did not believe her. I want to be plain about that. I did not believe her, and I did not disbelieve her. I stood there in the carport, and I took an average. I put the way she said it, which was wrong, together with the fact that she had washed my sheets for a year and a half, which was right, and I added them up and divided by 2, and I came out with a pretty number, and I wrote that pretty number down, and I went on and started the machine. My daddy is buried about 400 yards from where I was standing. The next 14 months, I did not look. That is not a figure of speech. I did not look at one statement. She brought the folder and I put the folder in the drawer with the other folders, and the drawer got full, and then the drawer would not close all the way, so I started putting them on top of the freezer in the utility room. And then on the second Saturday in January, I went out to the mailbox, and there was an envelope in there from an accounting firm in Albany that I had never heard of. It was addressed to me, not to me and Carolyn. To me. It was one page, and there was a balance printed on it, and it asked me to confirm whether that balance was correct as of the 31st day of December. Down at the bottom of it there was a box, and inside the box, in heavy print, it said this: "If this does not agree with your records, please write the difference in the space below and mail this form directly to us in the enclosed envelope. Do not return this form to the bank. Do not return this form to the bank." I stood at the end of my driveway for a while with the mailbox door still hanging open, because I had run a business for 44 years, and I knew exactly what that sentence was and why it was there. That is an auditor's confirmation letter. Once a year, an outside firm picks a handful of customers at random and writes to them directly. And the whole reason it exists, the entire reason, is that the people inside an institution can tell you anything they want to. And the only way anybody ever finds out different is to ask the customer at home, at his own mailbox, where nobody is standing behind him. That letter was the moisture probe. Somebody I have never met, doing a boring job for a fee, walked out to my life and stuck a rod in it. The balance on the page was $1,104. I had been told, 4 weeks earlier, by my own daughter, standing in my carport, that the number was a little over 400,000. I did not call her. I want to explain why. Because I have been asked about it more than any other thing in this whole business, usually by people who are certain they would have done different. If I had picked up that phone on Saturday morning, I would have gotten an explanation. Carolyn is not stupid and she is not slow. And there is an explanation for every single thing in this story that sounds completely reasonable if you hear it before you have seen the paper. I would have gotten the explanation, and I would have wanted it to be true, and by Monday there would have been a new account somewhere with a new name on it. And I would be telling you a shorter and much sadder story tonight. So I went back to what a ginner does when a number comes back ugly. I went out and found more places to put the rod. Monday morning I drove into Culverson, and I stood at the counter and I asked for statements. Every statement, going back 3 years, on every account with my name on it. And standing at that counter I learned a thing it took me 78 years to find out, and it does not cost anybody one dime. They are your statements. Nobody has to give you permission. You do not need a lawyer, and you do not need a reason. You walk in with your driver's license and you ask, and they print them, and it cost me $11 for the copies. Pearl printed them. She did not say one word to me the whole time except the amount, and she did not look at me, and her hands were not steady on the tray. I took them home, and I did not read them at the kitchen table. I took them out to the shed, and I put them on the workbench under the drop light, and I pulled the drop light way over to the left and down low, so the light came across the page instead of down onto it. That is how a classer looks at cotton. Flat light hides everything. You put the light in at an angle, low and across, and every ridge and every gap throws a shadow, and a thing you could not see at all a second ago is suddenly the only thing on the table. And here is what came up out of the paper. It was not a theft. Let me pick the word slow here, because the words are going to matter later on. There was no night that a safe got opened. What there was 106 Tuesdays, small ones at first, $1,100, 2,000. Then a stretch in the spring of that first year with nothing at all, which I now know was the stretch when Randy thought he had it turned around. Then 8,000. Then 12. Then a Friday in October where a certificate of deposit that I had been paying into since Reagan was president got closed out at a penalty, and the whole thing walked out the door in one piece. And every one of them, every single one, said the same thing in the little column on the right. Withdrawal. Signature. On file. Not stolen. Not forged. Signed for. I. G. I sat out there until about 3 in the morning with the light lying across that paper, and the worst part of it was not the money. Not close. It was that I could see myself in it. Because when you lay 14 months out in a row like that, you can see the shape of a person deciding. You can see her sitting somewhere, with a phone in her hand, deciding to do it again. There were 3 separate times where she took out an amount just under a number that would have made the bank ask her a question. And in the middle of it, in July, there is a deposit. $600, going the other way, back into my account. $600. Somebody was still fighting somebody in there. I have thought about that $600 more than I have thought about the 400,000. The next morning, I drove 40 minutes over to Nashville, Georgia, and I walked into the office of a lawyer named Harlan Boatwright, who I did not know from Adam. I picked him because he was not from Culverson. That was my whole method. He was maybe 60. He had a stack of files on the floor beside his chair, because there was no room on the desk. I put the statements on the desk and I talked for 11 minutes and he did not write anything down, which bothered me. And then he asked me exactly one question. He said, "Mr. Sharp, when you put your daughter on that account, did you make her an owner or did you make her an agent?" I said I did not know what the difference was. He said, "That is all right. Most people do not. And I am going to tell you something and I want you to sit still for it. That question is the entire case. Not the 106 withdrawals, not the amount, not what she told you in the carport. That one question. And I do not know the answer to it. And neither do you. And right now, neither does she." Then he leaned back and he said the sentence I have repeated to every person I have talked to since. "The bank is allowed to hand it to her. That is not the same thing as it being hers." I asked him what we do now, and I said the thing everybody says, which was, "Can we freeze it?" And he said we can. And then he said, "But if we freeze it today, she finds out today. And everything she does after today she does with a lawyer of her own and a story she has had time to build. You have got nothing left in those accounts to protect, Mr. Sharp. What you have got left to protect is the truth about what happened, and the truth does not get safer by getting louder. So we did nothing. For 19 days, we did absolutely nothing. On purpose. And it was the hardest 19 days I have ever spent, including the 11 weeks with my wife. And I say that knowing how it sounds. Doing nothing, it turns out, is not nothing. Harlan gave me a job. He said, "Go get me everything that has a date on it, and do not go anywhere near your daughter, and do not go anywhere near that bank." So I went and got dates. I went out to the gin first. It has not ginned a bale since the fall of 2009. A peanut buying point owns the building now, and they use the seed house for storage, and they let me come and go because the man who runs it hauled cotton for me when he was a boy. I went in through the office door, and the office is exactly the way we left it, right down to a 1998 feed store calendar. And in the bottom drawer of a green metal desk there were 41 years of my wife's ledgers. I did not need the ledgers. I needed one thing out of that drawer, and it took me 2 hours to find it. And when I found it, I ended up sitting down on the floor of that office and could not get myself up again for a while. It was a photograph. Carolyn, 17 years old, standing at the sample table in the classing shed, with her hair up under a bandana, holding a hank of lint out toward the camera like she was proud of it. She worked one summer for me, the summer of 1986, and she was good at it. She had the hands for it. She could pull a sample and see a bark contamination faster than a man I had paid for 9 years. I put that photograph in my shirt pocket, and I have not taken it out of that shirt since. Then I went and saw Eddie Lee Fountain, who is 73, and who classed cotton for the government for 31 years in Macon, before she retired back down here to look after her mother. I told her the whole thing sitting in her front room with a fan going. And she said something to me I keep chewing on. She said, "Hoyt, you know why the classing office works? It is not because those people are honest, although they are. It is because not one of them has ever heard your name. The card comes back from a room where nobody knows you, and nobody loves you, and nobody owes you a thing," she said. "That is not a cruelty. That is the only mercy there is in this business." Then she said the hard part. She said, "And that is exactly why you have been 3 years without a card on your own family." I went home and I got out my daddy's probe. I do not know why. It was the middle of February. There was nothing to probe. And I took it out of the corner of the shed and stood there holding it. 5 places, and you write down the worst one, and it went through me like cold water that I had not written down a worst one about my own child in 3 years, not one time. Every ugly reading I had ever taken off of her, and there had been some, I had put it in a row with the good ones, and I had divided. I had been averaging her since the funeral. The last thing I did in those 19 days was the thing I dreaded most. I called my granddaughter. Jolene is 20. She goes by JoJo. She works the scale house at the buying point, and she takes 2 classes at night at the technical college over in Nashville. She is Carolyn's girl. I called her, and I did not tell her one single fact, because Harlan had been clear about that, and instead I asked her a coward's question. I asked her how her mama was doing, and there was a silence on that phone about 4 seconds long. Then JoJo said, "Granddaddy, are y'all fixing to make me pick?" I said, "No, baby." I said, "I would not do that to you. Not ever." And she said, "Well, somebody is." I did not know what she meant. I want you to understand that I hung up that phone and I truly did not know what she meant. And I turned it over all that night and all the next day. And then, on the 20th day, a Teal County deputy that I have known since he was in the youth group pulled into my yard at 8 in the morning and would not look at me while he handed me an envelope. It was a petition, filed in the probate court of Teal County, asking that a guardian and a conservator be appointed for me. Georgia has a probate court in every one of its counties, with a judge the county elects, and that court is where this kind of thing lives. A guardian is over the person, a conservator is over the property, and the petition asked for both. There were 9 pages. I read them standing up in the yard, and then again sitting sideways in the truck with my boots on the gravel, and I have read them 40 times since. And I still cannot get all the way through the 4th page without having to stop. Because the proof, the actual evidence, the thing they attached to the back, was my own bank statements. The respondent has made in excess of 100 unexplained withdrawals from his accounts over a 14-month period, depleting assets of more than $400,000, and is unable to give any account of where those funds have gone. Every word of that is true. And that right there is where I hung up. Not one syllable of it is a lie. The withdrawals happened. There are more than 100 of them. I cannot give any account of where the money went, because I do not know where it went. And every one of those transactions says signature on file. And the signature on file is mine and hers. And the paper does not say which one of us walked up to that window on any given Tuesday. She did not have to steal my money and then lie about it. She took my money in a way that made the record say I took it. And then she took that record to a judge. There was a physician's affidavit stapled behind it. Dr. Womack, the man who told me a tremor is a tremor. His affidavit said, correctly, that I have a progressive movement disorder affecting my dominant hand, that I am 78 years of age, that I live alone, and that I had recently been unable to complete a written form in his office. Every line of that was true, too. He was never asked one single thing about my mind, because nobody asked him. They asked him what they needed, and he answered what he was asked. And that is how most bad things in this world actually get done. There was a page of what they called incidents. I missed my nephew's wedding in Waycross. That is on there. What is not on there is that I did not go because I did not want to sit at a table with Randy Tillery's people. I left my truck running in the lot at the Piggly Wiggly. That happened. I was 51 when I did that too. I got lost coming back from Valdosta in the fall. That is on there in one sentence. What is not on there is that the bypass was closed for the culvert work and half the county got turned around that week. Not one of those was invented. Every one of them was a real reading, taken off of a real place, and then laid in a row and added up. And there is a word for what you get when you do that to a man. And I had spent my whole life warning people about it. The court did what the court is supposed to do. Within a few days, I had a letter appointing a lawyer to represent me. A young woman named Ruth Ann Session, who could not have been 30 years old, and a notice that the court would be appointing somebody to come out and evaluate me. I want to say this carefully. Every one of those protections is a good thing. In Georgia, the person the petition is about gets a lawyer, whether he asks for one or not, and gets an evaluation by somebody the court picks rather than somebody the family picks, and gets a hearing. Those rules exist because of people like me, and they are the only reason I am sitting here. But I am going to be honest about how it felt, because I think somebody watching this is going to need it someday. It felt like being handed to people. Miss Session was kind and she was sharp and she was on my side, and she still talked about me in the third person twice in the first meeting while I was in the room, and she did not even hear herself do it. I have turned that over a good many nights since. She is not a bad person. She had 11 of these. That is what happens to you. Once a piece of paper says a man might not be all there, the whole world starts talking a little over the top of him, and half of them are being tender when they do it, and it is worse when they are being tender. And Culverson found out inside of a week. Nobody was ugly to me. That is not how it works down here. What happened was that the casseroles started. What happened was that a woman I have known since grade school put her hand on my arm at the Dollar General and said, "Now you let people help you," in a voice like I had been diagnosed with something. What happened was that the pharmacist started confirming my own prescriptions back to me twice. And what happened, the very worst one, was at church on the third Sunday. Junior McCraney, who ran the press at my gin for 26 years, and who is not a soft man in any direction, stood waiting where the pew lets out and walked me to my truck with his hand on my elbow. His hand on my elbow. Junior McCraney. I sat in that truck in the church lot for about 20 minutes, and I fell back on the one habit I have got, which is to walk all the way to the front of a thing and hunt for the spot where somebody took an average. And when I got there, it was not her. She had told a lie in a carport, and I had taken it and averaged it against a year and a half of clean sheets. She had gone quiet and thin, and I had averaged that against Christmas. And every month, for 14 months, a folder came into my house with the truth in it, and I put it on top of a freezer, because opening it would have meant getting one more ugly number, and a man who is grieving will do almost anything not to get one more ugly number. The gin burned in 1966 because one man wanted the pretty number. I am not telling you she is innocent. Hold on to that. What I am telling you is that I know exactly where the first crack was, and it was not on her side of the wall, and I could not have done a single one of the things I did next if I had not sat in that truck and taken that reading on myself first. The next morning, I went to the bank, not to make a scene. I needed a copy of one more statement for Miss Session. Pearl printed it, and when she handed it across, she kept 2 fingers on the corner of it for a second longer than she needed to, and she said the only sentence she said to me in that whole 8 months. She said, "Mr. Sharp, tell your lawyer to send for the card." I said, "The statements." And she said, "No, sir, not the statements, the card." Then she said, "Next in line, please," and looked past me, and that was all. I did not know what a card was. I drove out to Harlan's office and I told him a teller had told me to send for the card, and I felt foolish saying it. Harlan Boatwright put down his pen. He said, "Mr. Sharp, that woman just handed you your whole case across a counter without saying a word she could get fired for, and I would like you to understand that before we go any further. What was on that card is the only reason I am sitting here able to say any of this out loud, and take 1 second and subscribe to the channel if you have not. This next part is the part I would have wanted somebody to tell my wife's people 40 years ago. And I would rather it reached one more kitchen tonight than not. It took 9 days. Harlan sent the bank a subpoena, which is just a piece of paper that makes them hand something over. And what came back was a certified copy of the signature card from that Tuesday, 2.5 years earlier. It was 1 page, front and back. On the front, halfway down, on the right-hand side, there is a row of little boxes. And the box that was marked, with a check mark and a set of initials next to it, said this: Authorized signer, agency designation, no ownership interest, no right of survivorship, agent, not owner. Harlan laid out what that means, and I will hand it to you in the same order he handed it to me, because it is worth more than everything else in this story put together. When you put another person on your bank account in this country, you are not doing one thing. You are doing one of two completely different things, and they look identical from the customer side of the counter, and most people never find out which one they did. If you make somebody a joint owner, you have given them the money, not access. The money. They can take all of it, and they have not done a thing wrong. Their creditors can come after it. If they get divorced, it can end up in that. And when you die, it is theirs, no matter what your will says, because your will only ever talks about what nobody has already been handed. If you make somebody an agent, an authorized signer, what some banks call a convenience designation, they can sign. That is all. They can pay your light bill, and your taxes, and your doctor. They own nothing. They inherit nothing. And everything they touch as your agent, which means they owe you an accounting for every dollar of it. Same counter, same day, same handwriting, Two completely different lives. And in Georgia, there is a second piece on top of that, and it is written into the law of this state. During your lifetime, a bank account belongs to the people on it in proportion to what each of them put into it, not in proportion to whose name is printed on it, in proportion to who put the money there. My daughter put in $600 one time in July. There is a companion section in that same law that says a bank may pay out on the signature of any one party to the account, and that the bank is not required to sit there and ask questions. That section is there to protect the bank. That is the whole reason for it. And the courts of this state have been plain that it does not decide and does not touch who the money actually belongs to, as between the people themselves. So when Harlan said it to me the first time and I thought it was a lawyer being clever, he was not being clever. He was reading me the statute. The bank was allowed to hand it to her. That is not the same thing as it being hers. Now, that was the front of the card. I turned it over. Stapled to the back was a second sheet, an older one, a new accounts worksheet from a good while back, and there was handwriting on it in the bottom margin. Small, tight, backhanded, every letter separate. My wife did not write cursive after about 1980 because she said it made numbers harder to trust. It said this, standing note. Hoyt cannot read the small print anymore, and he will not tell you. Read every form to him out loud, all the way through, every time. Do not let him sign anything I have not read to him first. And if I am not here, read it to him anyway. And then her initials. And a date. That date is more than 7 years ago. It is 3 years before anybody in our house said the word cancer. And it is a year before she retired. I want to try to tell you what happened to me in that office, and I do not think I am going to get it right. My wife knew I had quit reading the fine print. I never told her. I would take a form to the truck and bring it back signed, and she never once said a thing about it in 22 years, because she knew exactly what it would cost a man like me to be asked. So she did not ask me. She went to work and she wrote a note in a file at a bank, where I would never see it, where I could never be humiliated by it. And she put a fence around me that I did not know was there. And when she died, the fence stayed up. Because Pearl Dewberry had been reading forms out loud to me for years, and I thought that was just how Pearl was. And on the Tuesday that mattered, the Tuesday my daughter drove me in, Pearl looked in that folder and saw a standing note from a woman she had sat beside for 9 years. And she did what the note said. She read me the form, and before she read it, she asked me the one question in this entire world that decided everything. Do you want her to be able to sign it, or do you want her to own it? Harlan let me have the room for a while. I have buried my mother and my father and my wife and a brother. I did not cry at any of the 4 of them the way I cried in a lawyer's office in Nashville, Georgia over a photocopy. After that, the rest of it was just work. Harlan filed an answer. He filed a request for a full evaluation, which surprised Miss Session, because most people in my position try to duck it. I did not want it dismissed on a technicality. I wanted a stranger who did not know me and did not owe me a thing to come out and put a rod in me and write down a number, and I wanted that number in the file forever. He filed the certified card. He filed the auditor's confirmation letter, the one with my handwriting in the box, and a date stamp from the accounting firm in Albany, proving I had reported a discrepancy of $400,000 9 weeks before anybody filed anything about my mind. And then he did one more thing that I did not understand at the time. He sent one letter, not to Carolyn, to the lawyer who had signed the petition. 2 paragraphs, no threats in it anywhere, and all it did was list what had been filed and attach the card. Harlan said, "They will read this in about 90 seconds, and then they will spend a week deciding whether to tell their client the truth about her own case." He was off by 4 days. On a Thursday night, at about 9:45, headlights came up my driveway, and Randy Tillery got out of a truck I did not recognize, because his had been repossessed in January. He did not come up on the porch. He stood out there in the yard between the truck and the steps holding his cap down against his leg, and he was 59 years old and looked about 90. I turned the porch light off. I want to be clear that I did that on purpose. There are some things a man ought not have to say to another man with a light shining on his face. Randy talked for about half an hour, and I did not say 6 words the whole time. He said it started with $11,000, a rebuild on a motor, in a shop in Tifton, and he had it. And then the check from a broker was 90 days late, and then it was never, and he did not tell Carolyn for 2 months. He said the second time was 19,000, and he did tell her, and she went and got it. And it was not until after that one that either of them ever said out loud, where it was coming from. He said Carolyn cried the first 4 or 5 times, and then she quit crying, and he said that was the part that scared him. He said she started keeping a list. She wrote everyone down in a spiral notebook in the truck, and she told him they were going to put it all back when the Perry contract came through, and the Perry contract never came through, and she kept writing them down anyway. Then he told me the thing I did not know. He said, Hoyt, the guardianship was not her idea. I said, whose was it? He said, mine. He said, he was the one who went and talked to a lawyer. He said the way he had it figured, if the court gave Carolyn the conservatorship, then the withdrawals would all be under the court, and there would be reports and a bond, and it would look like management instead of what it was, and he could get 18 months to sell the rig and the shop and put it back, and nobody would ever have to know. He said Carolyn fought him for 3 weeks. He said she did not sleep. He said the night she finally signed the petition, she went out and sat in the car in the driveway until almost daylight. And then he said, and she signed it. It was a good while before I said anything at all. Then I asked him one question, the only one I asked him the whole night. I said, Randy, did she read it before she signed it? And he said every word, twice. And that is when I understood what was actually in front of me. And it was worse than a thief, and it was a long way better than a monster. It was a woman who read the whole thing all the way through, and understood exactly what it said about her own daddy, and signed it anyway, because she could not see a fifth place to put the rod. He asked me what I was going to do. I told him the only true thing I had, which was that I had not decided. He got in that borrowed truck and backed out of my yard, and I stood there in the dark for a long time. Because it would have been so easy right then. I had the card. I had the letter with the date on it. I had a lawyer who was already 3 moves ahead, and a young court-appointed attorney who was going to be embarrassed, and I had a whole county that had been patting me on the elbow for 2 months, and would have loved nothing better than a spectacle on the courthouse square. I could have burned the both of them to the ground on a Thursday morning in front of everybody. I went out to the shed instead and stood there with my daddy's probe laid across the workbench. And the only question actually in front of me was not, what do the two of them deserve? It was, what is the worst true thing, and can I stand to write it down? The hearing was on a Thursday morning in April at 9 o'clock, on the second floor of the Teal County Courthouse, in a room about the size of a Sunday school class. I had spent 11 weeks getting ready for it. I had a suit pressed. I had a folder. Miss Session had walked me through what they might ask me, and I had lain awake 3 nights running the answers. What actually happened in that room is the most important part of this whole business, and almost nobody ever bothers to tell it. It took 4 minutes. There were 9 matters on the calendar that morning, and mine was the third one. Judge Pitts called the case. The lawyer who filed the petition stood up and said his client wished to dismiss it with prejudice. Miss Session said no objection. The court-appointed evaluator's report was already in the file, and the judge said he had read it, and he said one sentence about it, which was that he found no evidence of incapacity of any kind. He signed something. He said, next matter. 4 minutes. Nobody testified. Nobody made a speech. No lawyer said the word forgery, or theft, or elder abuse, or shame, because none of those words had anything to do with what was in front of that judge. Nobody in that room raised their voice one time. There were maybe 11 people in there, and 9 of them were waiting on their own case and did not look up. Carolyn was on the back row on the left. She did not look at me. She had on a navy blue dress I bought her in 1990-something for a job interview in Albany, and I have no idea whether she knew she had it on. I walked out into the hall and down the marble stairs and out onto the square, and there was a drink machine bolted to the wall outside the tag office, and I put my money in and got a Coca-Cola in a can, and I stood there in the sunshine and could not open it. My right hand would not do it. I got it up against my chest, and I could not make the tab go. A young fellow in a road department shirt came out of the tag office and took it out of my hands without asking, and popped it and handed it back and said, "There you go, sir," and kept walking, and never knew one thing about it. I sat down on a bench, and I drank that Coca-Cola, and I will tell you what I felt, and it was not victory. It was that I had spent 11 weeks getting ready for a war, and there was never going to be a war, because that is not how any of this ever actually gets decided. It gets decided in a room in Macon by somebody who never heard your name. It gets decided in a box on the right-hand side of a signature card. It gets decided by a woman at a window asking a 9-word question because a dead woman left a note in a folder. The loud part is never the part that saves you. The loud part is just the part they make television out of. 2 weeks later, I asked Carolyn to meet me at the gin. I picked it because they were pulling the last of the machinery out that month, and because it was the only place on this earth that meant the same thing to both of us. I got there first. I unlocked the man door on the north end, and I turned on the one string of lights that still works over where the stands used to sit, and it throws a light across that floor at about knee level, low and sideways, which is the only kind of light that building has ever had. She came in at 4 o'clock in a work shirt with the sleeves rolled. I did not bring the statements. I want you to hear that. I had 106 of them, and I did not bring one, because I was not there to read her a list, and because I had already figured out that a list is just a bigger average. I brought a piece of notebook paper and a carpenter's pencil. I told her, I am going to do a 5 place on myself, and you are going to stand there while I do it. And after that, I will lay out what happens next. And I did. I said, place 1. When your mama died, I quit being your daddy for about 2 years and I let you be the parent. And I never once asked you what that was costing you. And I told myself that was grief. That is a bad number, but it is not the worst one. I said, place 2. In September of that first year, you told me you and Randy were tight, and I heard you say it. And I had $11,000 in a coffee can in that shed I could have handed you. And I did not offer it, because I did not want to have a conversation. That is worse. I said, place 3. You lied to me in my own carport about a certificate of deposit, and I stood there and let you, because making you say it out loud would have cost me something. I let my own child lie to me because it was cheaper. I said, place 4. 14 months of folders came into my house with the truth in them, and I stacked them on a freezer. Every one of those folders was you asking me to catch you. And then I said, place 5, and I had to stop for a minute. I said, place 5 is that I am the one who taught you 5 places and you are the one who did it. You wrote every single one of them down in a spiral notebook in a truck. You kept the worst number for 2.5 years by yourself with nobody to give it to, and you would still be keeping it if a stranger in Albany had not mailed me a letter. I wrote it on the paper with the carpenter's pencil, and it is the only thing I wrote, and I handed it to her. It said, the worst number is that she was the only one in this family still writing anything down. Then I told her what was going to happen, and I said it flat. The way you read a moisture ticket, there would be an accounting. Every dollar, dated, from an agent to the man she was agent for, filed with the court, where she filed the other thing. There would be a repayment agreement, signed, with a number on it that she could actually pay, and not a number that made her feel better, over as many years as it took. And if she died owing it, then she died owing it, and that was all right too. The rig was already gone. The shop would go. That was on them. And I told her that I had asked Harlan Boatwright to write to the district attorney's office and tell them I did not want a thing. Not a charge, not a referral, not 1 hour of anybody's time. And that I had done that before I ever knew about the notebook. And she could believe that or not. She stood in that gin about a minute and a half and did not say one word. Then she said, can I say my number out loud? And I said, that is the only thing I came out here for. She gave me a figure she could pay a month. It was a little over half of what she had told Randy she could pay, and about a third of what she wanted it to be. And it was the first true number that woman had handed me since her mother's funeral. I said, write it down. She wrote it on the back of my paper with my pencil in that terrible low sideways light, and her hand was shaking about as bad as mine, and we walked out and I locked the man door. That was 14 months ago. She has not missed a payment. It will not be paid off. I have done the arithmetic, and if she lives to be 81, she will still owe me something, and neither one of us has ever once brought that up. We are not what we were. I want to be honest about that, because there is a version of this where I tell you that everything got warm again, and you would know I was lying. There is a carefulness between us now that was not there before. She calls on Sundays, she comes at Christmas. When she hands me something, she puts it down on the table instead of into my hand, so I do not have to be watched taking it. And I have never told her I noticed. That is not the same as before. But it is a great deal better than a courtroom, and it is a great deal better than being right by myself in a clean house. Randy paid off the shop and drives for a company out of Adel now and comes to the door instead of the yard. I want to leave you with 3 plain things, because I have got no business preaching, and I do have some business telling. First, if there is another name on your bank account, or you are fixing to put one on there, go in and ask them out loud which one it is. Are they an owner, or are they an agent? Ask for a copy of the signature card, the actual card, and take it home and put it where you keep things. It is yours. They will print it for you. Second, open your own mail. All of it. And if a letter ever comes to your house from an accounting firm you never heard of, asking you to confirm a balance, and it says down at the bottom, "Do not send this back to the bank," then that is the one piece of paper in the entire year that was written to you and nobody else. Fill it out. Mail it in the envelope they gave you. Third, and this one is not about money. A shaking hand is not a shaking mind. And nothing on God's green earth says you have to be handed over to people just because you have gotten hard to look at. Go see a lawyer of your own before you need one. Not your children's lawyer. Yours. Jojo comes out on Saturdays now. She has moved over to the classing side of things, and she is going to be good at it. Better than me. Because she has got her grandmother's way with a number and her mother's hands. The probe is hers. Now. I gave it to her in September, and I told her what my daddy told me and what I did not do, and she has already caught 2 loads that I would have let go. She asked me once why you take the worst one. Why not the average, Granddaddy? The average is more fair. And I gave her the straight answer, which is that fair has got nothing to do with any of it. The machine is not going to meet the average. The machine is going to meet one place, the ugliest place, on the coldest night, when you are the only one on the floor. So you go out there in the dark and you find it. You put the rod in 5 times. You write down the worst one. And then you go on and start the machine.